Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, June 24th, 2021. My name is Emma Vigeland in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Haggai Matar, award-winning Israeli journalist and executive director of Plus 972 magazine's advancement of citizen journalism on the state of Israeli politics after the ousting of Benjamin Netanyahu. Meanwhile, the bipartisan Gang of 10 has reached a deal on a $974 billion infrastructure package, and a reminder, you still need 5 more Republicans to clear the filibuster. And they're Republicans. So. President Biden announces a program to combat gun violence that includes, wait for it, more funding for the police. Crime Bill Biden doesn't change his stripes. Despite a deluge of lobbying by Facebook, Google, and more, the House Committee has advanced the American Choice and Innovation Online Act, an antitrust bill that seeks to curb big tech abuses. It still has to advance in the House and the Senate. Let's see if the GOP's anti-big tech posture has any teeth beyond just sucking up to Trump. The Biden administration has fired the pro-Trump head of U.S. Border Patrol, Rodney Scott, in a long-awaited move. One could say that he was deported from his position. Or one could not say that, honestly. The Supreme Court sided with a high school student who was suspended for saying the F word in a Snapchat that she sent while she was off school grounds, which civil rights groups are calling a victory for the First Amendment. And in more good Supreme Court news, the court also ruled yesterday that police aren't always permitted to enter someone's home without a warrant for a minor crime. It's the little things, I guess. And lastly, Brazilian Environment Minister Ricardo Salles was forced to resign after allegedly obstructing a police investigation into illegal deforestation in the Amazon. All this and more on today's program. Welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen. I am obviously not Sam. I say this every Thursday, but you're going to see more of me on Thursdays than you normally do. For people new to this program, people new to the show who may have come due to the events of this week, I am the co-host of the Majority Report, Emma Vigeland, and I will be guiding you through this show. Let's get into it, shall we? Yesterday, General Mark Milley, who is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, it's always a difficult thing to say. The S, no one knows where it goes, but I digress. He went viral a little bit by responding to a question from Representative Matt Gaetz about critical race theory, the latest manufactured outrage by Fox News that we're all forced to talk about now because apparently it's the biggest problem in the country that's entirely made up. Parents are having meltdowns at PTA meetings, etc. So Matt Gaetz asked Mark Milley this question. Let's take a listen.
First of all, on the issue of critical race theory, etc., I'll obviously have to get much smarter on whatever the theory is. But I do think it's important, actually, for those of us in uniform to be open-minded and be widely read. And the United States Military Academy is a university. And it is important that we train and we understand. And I want to understand white rage, and I'm white, and I want to understand it. So what is it that caused thousands of people to assault this building and try to overturn the Constitution of the United States of America? What caused that? I want to find that out. I want to maintain an open mind here, and I do want to analyze it. It's important that we understand that because our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Guardians, they come from the American people. So it is important that the leaders, now and in the future, do understand it. I've read Mao Zedong. I've read Karl Marx. I've read Lenin. That doesn't make me a communist. So what is wrong with understanding, having some situational understanding about the country for which we are here to defend? And I personally find it offensive that we are accusing the United States military, our general officers, our commissioned, non-commissioned officers, of being, quote, woke or something else because we're studying some theories that are out there. That was started at Harvard Law School years ago, and it proposed that there were laws in the United States, antebellum laws prior to the Civil War, that led to a power differential with African Americans that were 3/4 of a human being when this country was formed. And then we had a Civil War and Emancipation Proclamation to change it. And we brought it up to the Civil Rights Act in 1964. It took another 100 years to change that. So look it, I do want to know. And I respect your service, and you and I are both Green Berets. But I want to know. And it matters to our military and the discipline and cohesion of this military. And I thank you for the opportunity to make a comment on that.
Thank you, General.
A comment, yeah, more like a smackdown. Matt Gaetz shaking that head of his. A reminder that Gaetz is under investigation for potentially sleeping with a minor, but that's beside the point. It's just necessary to understand the context of who Matt Gaetz is. The thing about critical race theory is that it's essentially a placeholder for, you know, any type of education that the right wing fears won't indoctrinate our kids to be good little capitalists and, you know, good who have a faux sense of superiority about America, about their own whiteness, about our own history that's dominated by people that look like them, and that's all about waving the flag. I mean, that's really what the core of this fear is, and it's a completely, you know, illegitimate and manufactured fear. I can't say it enough. The only reason we're even talking about critical race theory, which has been around for decades at this point, taught in law school, it's about looking at our legal system through a comprehensive, holistic way about how we have treated Black people and people of color unfairly under the law. It's really not that groundbreaking. It's just because it's a part of the Fox machine, and they've done this successfully many times, creating an outrage out of whole cloth. But it is good that someone like General Milley is saying stuff like this, because one, it's important that we have someone in office who's speaking out about the critical race theory outrage and that it's BS, and hopefully trying to put a lid on this, even though Fox is talking about it nonstop and OAN has picked it up and all the right-wing media can't get enough of it. But why we need more people in our military and intelligence communities talking about things like this is because it triggers the right wing. And we might, by triggering the right wing, get what we want policy-wise. I don't know. It's still a pipe dream. But listen to what Laura Ingraham had to say in response to this speech by Milley.
We are sending our tax dollars to this military to an attempt to weed out so-called extremists, which just means conservative evangelicals, as far as I can tell. We're paying for that? Why is Congress not saying we're not going to give you a penny until all of this is eradicated from the military budget? Nothing. Oh. This is my offer to you. Nothing. That's what I would say.
Cool.
I'm totally outraged by him and his ridiculous response today. Sorry, Congressman.
Base, Laura Ingraham. We have a deal, Laura Ingraham. You want to cut military funding because they want to teach critical race theory? I mean, sure. Between this and the woke CIA stuff, you know, I'm all for it. If they're going to come around and think that our military and our intelligence institutions are in some way woke and not a part of the good America that they knew, I am all for it. Let us cut funding to the CIA, to the FBI, to the military. Thank you so much, Laura Ingraham. You know, we've really come to some sort of a... Wait, actually, I need to back it up. Please don't do this, right wing. You would trigger the libs so hard. I'd be so damn upset if you cut military funding.
Yeah, I'll just comment on his invocation of Mao, Marx, and Lenin. Like, that was
I think people got a little bit too excited about it based on the headlines. Like, he was saying that in a "we're not afraid to confront anything" type of way, and that's true. Like, the military needs to not be able to, or be able to confront ideas like that. They can't be afraid of it, and you wouldn't want a military that puts their head in the sand about things like that. But I also think the function of the military is going to, like, the military was supposed to guard the Black Hills for the Native Americans based on treaties, and they said a lot of positive things about that, but they ultimately paved the road to it too. This is kind of not an unfamiliar place for the American military to be in with regards to right-wing populism.
No, and I took issue too with the equation of, you know, whatever boogeyman the right wing's created in terms of critical race theory and the scariness of communism and reading Lenin. But, you know, this is the best, this is one of the better things we can hope for. And for the target audience, Matt, like, yeah, it's effective.
And I think it'd be very funny to see, like, Rufo debate Milley, like, just based on that, the optics of that.
We are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we will be speaking to Haggai Matar, Israeli journalist, executive director of Plus 972 Magazine's Advancement of Citizen Journalism. They're a great Israeli magazine. We'll be right back.
In the meantime, we have an ad today, and that is for Geology. They've been running a great deal with us. They sent me some free skincare recently, right at the end of quarantine. Got to get my, you know, my face in shape for socializing again, seeing people. And, you know, everyone's just been saying how good my skin looks. And that's a very nice thing to hear. What is Geology? It's a simple skincare routine formulated for daily use. And, you know, what's really nice about it is that it personalizes your skincare routine, whether you're a complete neophyte, you've been washing your face with dish soap, or if you're someone like me who has been going to the dermatologist for years and trying to figure out like what exactly works for you. So if you come from nothing, they'll give you something that will work for you. Or if you have very, you know, intricate care routine, it can be integrated very easily. And you start with like a quick little survey that you take on their website, and you start with 4 different products: a face wash, a morning face cream, a night face cream, and an eye cream. And I've personally taken on the night cream, or the eye cream, as my primary product from them. And what I really like about the night cream is that it takes out the bags under your eyes, and it, you know, the wrinkles are kind of like going away, and it's their best-selling product. So, you know, I'm on to something, obviously, along with everyone else. And, you know, it's just a really great skincare routine that I've, you know, gotten used to now. And you get a 90-day supply of the skincare, and you can subscribe and save after that if everything's working for you, or you can just go a la carte like I've done with the eye cream. And they've got customer service and skin consultations with like dermatologists online that will help you like how to use the product, or if you're using too much or too little, what you can expect. And you'll start noticing results right away. Like I said, like people really give me looks, saying nice things to me. We all love that. So head over to geology.com and take their free skincare quiz, save up to 40% on your 30-day trial, and check out the link in the podcast and the YouTube description. You'll save 40% off your 30-day trial today.
All right. Do we have Haggai? Okay. Oh, there we are. So I would like to welcome to the program Haggai Matar, award-winning Israeli journalist and executive director of Plus 972 Magazine's Advancement of Citizen Journalism. Welcome to the show, Haggai.
Hey there. Hello. Thanks for having me.
So for those of you who don't watch our Peacock show, I interviewed Haggai a few weeks ago, or a little bit of a while ago, before things were fully settled in the Israeli elections. And so I wanted to have him back on to talk about the outcome. Netanyahu ousted after 12 years as prime minister. Just set the stage for the audience, if you could. about how this came to be and kind of some background on why this all culminated in the ousting of Bibi after all these years?
Sure. So it's a very long story, but in essence, Netanyahu has been the focal point of Israeli politics for the past few years. We've seen Israeli politics kind of move away from questions of ideology, of different political camps. We've actually seen more and more Israelis turn to the right as their kind of central political agenda. But at the same time, the questions that have been on the table for most Israelis were Netanyahu, yes or no? Can we continue? Do we want to continue under Netanyahu after 12 years in power? Or is it time to move on? And that has become a very polarizing question. You have almost 50% of Israelis saying that Netanyahu is one of the best leaders we've ever had. We need to stay with him for as long as possible. And a little over 50% that do not feel the same, which is what allowed this new government to be formed. The challenge in forming this new government was that those other 50% or a little over don't agree with each other on almost anything else, which made it almost impossible to form this coalition, but eventually they did.
Right, and I want to get back to that, but, first, since most of our viewers, I would imagine, are American, but hello to everybody who's watching internationally, I'd love if we could just kind of give a bit of a recap of the leadership of Netanyahu and, what that meant in terms of the occupation as well as the Jewish nation state law from a few years ago. What was accomplished by his far-right administration and kind of where he took politics in Israel, just domestically for them, and then also in relation to occupied Palestine.
Sure. So when Netanyahu came into power in 2009, it was actually his second term. But when he came into power then, the feeling was that the idea of reaching peace with Palestinians and a two-state solution is such a given that any politician, even on the right, has to commit to it, at least verbally. These were the Obama years at the time. And Netanyahu, stepping into power, one of the first things he did was surprise people on the right by making the statement that he supports the two-state solution and that's where he's going. And he went on to continue negotiating with Palestinians. And things seemed like they were a continuation of what we've seen in previous administrations. However, at the same time, Netanyahu did devote these 12 years in power to completely dismantling the notion of negotiations for peace. He devoted this time to entrenching the occupation, making it as everlasting as possible, and basically removing the question of how to deal with Palestine and Palestinians from the table of Israeli politics. So if at the time the question of how to end the occupation was central to Israeli politics, 12 years later, he has made it so that almost all Israelis would want either formal annexation, de facto annexation, or keeping things exactly as they are. But the idea of resisting the apartheid nature of this military regime and saying that people in this land all deserve equality, that is currently a fringe point of view in Israeli politics. And that is one of Netanyahu's biggest victories in this 12 years in power.
Well, that's a Herculean accomplishment, let alone a villainous one. I mean, I'm curious about what steps that were taken, not to get too bogged down in this, but I think the context is enormously important. One was, I would say, the sparking of conflict in order to kind of cement and flex his muscle, as we saw even recently, which failed. He was not able to maintain power, but this was not the first time that he'd engaged in these kinds of activities. What were some of the ways that he was able to create that mass consensus in just, less than 2 decades?
So it's true that Netanyahu has not shied away from escalating violence on occasion. We saw that recently. We saw that in 2014 in the massive assault on Gaza, the devastating assault at the time. But I think actually a more indicative part of his rule has been to try to calm things down. and to progress the occupation and to progress Israeli control of Palestinian territories in a way that would spark as little resistance as possible. I think the rationale for him has been that the occupation had several downfalls from an Israeli perspective. I'm not talking about the obvious Palestinian perspective. And one was the cost in human life, that Palestinian resistance was causing a severe price to human life on the Israeli side. There was a cost to the economy. There was a cost to tourism. And there was also a cost to Israel's legitimacy in international diplomacy. And I think Netanyahu made it his kind of project throughout these 12 years to reduce those prices, to make them almost non-existent. And if you take the first decade of the 2000s, you would see that Israel suffered over 1,000 casualties. And if you look at the second decade, we're talking about 100 or a little over that. So the idea that you can diminish the number of Israelis killed as part of this so-called conflict, which is by no means a symmetrical conflict, is one that Netanyahu has been very committed to, while Palestinians have been dying at the same rate and even faster. In terms of international diplomacy, getting the sort of legitimacy that Netanyahu was able to get from Donald Trump, of course, but also from Arab regimes in the region, showing that there's no significant pushback from the EU as Israel expands its control of the West Bank and continues with the siege on Gaza. So basically kind of dismantling point by point all those things that the moderate left in Israel has been saying, that we can't afford to continue with the occupation because of all these different costs. He's been able to say no, we can have our cake and eat it too. We can have the occupation and reduce the cost of lives and get legitimacy and have a blooming economy. That was basically the Netanyahu message, and I think it's been resonating with Israelis.
Right. I mean, and even you talk about him as a polarizing figure. I would imagine or not imagine, from what I've read, that largely stems from these corruption investigations that were a bit of his downfall. And then in 2018, there hasn't been a budgetary agreement since that time. So the country was essentially in deadlock, which led to his ousting. Talk about the impact of the inability to form a coalition government in that time. And was it really mostly the corruption investigations that led to that kind of brewing anti-Bibi cohort that was eventually successful in recent weeks?
So to start with that question, I think there were very different motives for different people. Part of this coalition that was formed against Netanyahu comes from Palestinian citizens that Netanyahu has been inciting against throughout his career, really building his career on incitement against Palestinian citizens. And they've obviously wanted to see him out of power. So that is one part of this unlikely coalition. Another is the Israeli left, shrunk though it may be, that does oppose the occupation and everything Netanyahu represents in the economy and in everything else. And then you also have kind of your moderates, your center, that were troubled by Netanyahu's corruption, his assaults on the media, on the courts, on the prosecution, on the police, basically his attempts to dismantle different gatekeepers and checks and balances that are necessary for liberal democracy. So they're not concerned with occupation so much, but they were concerned with these issues. Another aspect of criticism has been his deep alliance with the ultra-Orthodox communities, and you have people who are on the devout secular side that really oppose this opposition with the ultra-Orthodox. They fear religious oppression against secular Jewish Israelis, and that's a sort of pushback from them. And then lastly, you had people on the right who felt that either Netanyahu was not taking to the country right enough, or were just sad and disappointed not to see him move away, that he's clinging to power and not making room for alternative leaders to grow under him, basically sabotaging new leaders one after the other. I think this alliance of the right, the center, the liberals, the secular, the left, and the Palestinians, that's basically the coalition that now formed this new government.
So, I mean, before we even dive further into the coalition, before he was ousted, reports came out that he was essentially trying to, or did form alliances with essentially Jewish supremacists and people in the Knesset who were incredibly extreme and were not necessarily a part of Israeli politics for decades up until this point, until this kind of far-right movement has become a lot more normalized. Talk about that dynamic as well. Luckily, I mean, the silver lining, I guess, is he wasn't successful in that effort, but those politicians and those remnants are still there.
Yeah, you're very right. As part of this kind of moving of the goalpost, as the Israeli society was moving more and more to the right, part of what we've seen is that it's not just the center that's becoming more right. We've actually seen right-wingers becoming much more fanatical, much more fundamentalist, much more fascist in their approaches, which means that for the first time in a very long time, we're seeing outspoken fundamentalist fascists in Knesset. And that is really part of that shift that's been happening. It's been part of the legitimization that Netanyahu has been giving to these extremists. He's really invested a lot of his own political capital to allow those forces to grow and to succeed and to enter parts of the Israeli society in which they didn't have room before. And I think that is a very dangerous part of his legacy, because those people are now, they're here to stay. Even if Netanyahu himself might move on, we will see them as part of Israeli politics for the long term.
And the kind of views they espouse essentially are?
We'll talk about from the religious perspective, it's extreme homophobia and basically wanting to create halakha, a state run by Jewish biblical law and not by civil and liberal law. So that's on the religious side. And then their kind of nationalistic side, their fascist side, is essentially proposing ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, both in the occupied territories and within Israeli Palestinian communities, Israeli citizens. So these are very, very extreme views.
Well, cool. They're saying it out loud. I mean, that's. I'm being sarcastic. My point is that that's happening already in practice. But then when you have people who are explicit and proud of that kind of ideology, it takes on a whole new ugly formation. So let's get into the new coalition that was formed, right? So as you said, it's largely a result of anyone but Bibi politics and Yair Lapid and Naftali Bennet. They formed this kind of coalition of hawks and right-wingers and even Palestinian Islamists. So one, I mean, how is that two-headed monster, if you will, going to work? And what even though they did form this governing coalition that contains some ideological diversity, Bennett, who's going to take over, is incredibly right-wing, and many might say further right than Netanyahu.
Yeah, you're very right. He is, for a very long time, Bennett has been kind of the right-wing opposition to Netanyahu, either from within or from without successive Netanyahu governments. So having him in power as sort of a replacement for Netanyahu is definitely not good news from a leftist perspective. At the same time, he is bound by this unlikely coalition, and we don't yet know what that means and what that will look like. We've just started last week. This coalition government was sworn in, and we don't know what sort of policies it will promote. On the one hand, as you were saying, Naftali Bennett, a right-winger as prime minister, we have a series of very hawkish, some of them very extreme right-wingers in government, in top positions in the Ministry of Justice, and Internal Affairs, and the finance. So there's definitely a risk in this very right-wing government. At the same time, it cannot function without the more liberal and leftist and Palestinian factions of the government. So what we've actually been seeing, and this is within this 2-week period that the government has been able to survive this long, we've actually already started seeing opposition on the left to certain policies. One example is the so-called citizenship law that is renewed every year, has been renewed every year for 18 years, essentially preventing Palestinians from the West Bank or Gaza from marrying and gaining citizenship in Israel if they marry to Israeli citizens, usually Palestinian Israeli citizens. So this essentially a racist law that many in politics admit is meant for demographic purposes, to prevent Palestinians from changing the balance of demography between Jews and Palestinians. So this law has been automatically renewed every year for 18 years. And suddenly the government can't get enough votes to pass this bill because it has people on the left and the Palestinian side within the coalition refusing to support it. And the right-wing opposition, Netanyahu and his allies, are saying, we're not going to support you. Even though we support this bill, we're not going to save Bennett by coming to his rescue on the right and supporting this bill. He wanted to go into this government with leftists and Palestinians. Let him solve his own problems. So this is within these 2 weeks, just one example of how bound Bennett is to this very weird coalition. And we don't know how this crisis will be solved as of yet. And I think we'll see many more like it.
Right. So you do think that this is a sustainable kind of tension? Because my next question would be, how long does this last until the right wing gets fed up with, or kind of acquiesces and says, we're going to put our fascist politics first?
So that really remains to be seen. I mean, a lot of people are gambling that this government can survive a few months. That's been Netanyahu's really outspoken message to his supporters. He's been saying this government was formed as part of the fraud of the century, the biggest election fraud in Israeli and maybe world history, and we will topple it within a few months. That's kind of the Netanyahu and Likud and right-wing campaign that's been going on since the government was sworn in.
Sounds familiar.
And maybe he's right. Maybe this coalition is not sustainable because it's made out of such weird alliances. At the same time, almost all, if not all, of the parties to this coalition do have a vested interest in making this work. They want to see Netanyahu really removed from power, not just for a couple of months, but in the long term. They want to stay in power and try to promote policies. And it's a question to what extent they'll be able to negotiate with each other on an ongoing basis on every single point of policy that they'll be facing, where they'll give up, where the left will give in to the right, and where the right would actually be willing to consider progressive policies just to sustain this government.
It's a fascinating dynamic, and one of the fascinating elements too is the we talked about this in our previous interview, but the role of Mansour Abbas, formerly of the Joint List. Can you explain what the Joint List is to the audience, and kind of this very consequential leaving of Abbas from this, Palestinian-Israeli coalition? Sure.
So in brief, Palestinian citizens make up about 20% of Israeli citizens. These are people who live inside of Israel and not in the occupied territories. And they have always had political representation in Knesset.
And I'm sorry, we just clarify to the people that people in the occupied territories don't have political representation.
Exactly. Thank you. Very much so. They live under a military regime. They can't vote. Israel controls them without them having any say in that. But Palestinian citizens within Israel who can vote have political representation. Their parties, the parties that represent them, have never been a part of any government. Basically from both sides. You've seen the Jewish Zionist parties saying we don't want to ally with Palestinians, and Palestinians saying as long as this country is an occupying power, as it oppresses our brothers and sisters in the occupied territories, we don't want to be a part of the political game in that way. And in 2015, all these different parties allied to form the Joint List, which was in itself an unlikely coalition of Islamists with communists, of liberals with nationalists, different factions in Israeli-Palestinian politics, allying together to try and promote the rights of the Palestinian minority within Israel. What happened was that that list has tried to ally with the center-left to oust Netanyahu as early as 2019. And the center-left has basically refused it and denied its suggestions and chose to ally with Netanyahu instead. And in these latest elections that we had this March, it was actually Netanyahu who started courting the Islamist faction in the Joint List, saying, if you break away, I will let you into my government and I'll give you things that you never were able to gain as part of the Joint List. And they did. The Islamist faction broke away from the Joint List, negotiated with Netanyahu on entering a coalition with him. And the only reason that didn't happen was that Netanyahu's other allies, those same extreme fascists, fundamentalists on the Jewish side, which we mentioned before, said, no way we're going into a government with the Islamists. So Netanyahu actually was trapped in what he was making himself, the brew that he was making himself in supporting these extremists. And therefore he wasn't able to form a coalition. But after legitimizing this Islamist faction, the center-left and Bennett and Lapid were able to say, well, if Netanyahu is willing to sit with them, then obviously we can sit with them. And that's how they got Mansour Abbas and the Islamist Party to join them. That's how they're now part of the coalition. And this is a huge shift in the politics of Palestinian citizens that now need to contend for the first time with one of their own parties joining the government, seeing what that means. Some see it as a betrayal and some see it as an opening for a new beginning.
Right. I mean, and I think a lot of that depends on the leadership of Palestinian Israelis and, what they're going to prioritize. My sense of things is that someone like Mansour Abbas is a little more interested in, and again, this is just my read on things from the outside, celebrity or like being at the center of things, being one of the good Palestinian Israelis that can hobnob with the right wing and be in power, than actually say, representing Palestinians in the occupied territories, for example. I know you're a journalist and you may not want to kind of extrapolate on that, but is that a fair read on things?
I think Mansour Abbas, on a personal level, definitely enjoys this status. He's been dubbing himself the kingmaker of Israeli politics ever since these last elections. He's definitely been enjoying the spotlight. We've seen things that we've never seen in Israeli media before. We've seen the evening news open with a press conference in Nazareth by Mansour Abbas with green flags of the Islamic Party behind him. We've never seen so much attention given to Palestinian politics in the Israeli media before, and Mansour Abbas is really central to that, and he's definitely been enjoying that, no question about it. He's also definitely given up on any attempt to affect Israeli policy towards Palestinians in the occupied territories. He doesn't care about that. He doesn't say anything about that. And he will not risk this coalition for Palestinians in the occupied territories. However, one thing to say to his advantage, to a certain degree, I don't think it's only about himself. He did go into this coalition with very high demands for the people that he represents, mostly Bedouins who live in the south of Israel, in the Negev, people who live in unrecognized villages, who face house demolitions on a very regular basis, who don't have basic infrastructure of water and electricity. So basically going into this government in exchange for recognition of some of these villages and funds that will be directed to the communities that voted for him, you can say that that's giving up on the national agenda and the kind of broad Palestinian struggle. I think that'll be a very just argument. But at the same time, it's not that he went in only for his own benefit. He did gain, or we'll see if he actually makes good on those promises, but he did get some promises to affect and support his base of constituents.
So I want to turn back to the new, government and the members of the cabinet ministers, and what their beliefs are, how they could execute those beliefs. A lot of them are from Netanyahu's orbit, but are just repurposed and repackaged, and they're right wing. So I'm forgetting which minister it is, but whose pet issue is no more African migrants to Israel. Those are some of the topics that I think dominate the powers there. If you could just give us a sense of who this cabinet is going to be occupied by.
So you're very right, and as you mentioned, we actually have two people now in power who've in part built a career on campaigning against the very, very few, we're talking about tens of thousands of African asylum seekers that are currently in Israel. And those two politicians, Ayelet Shaked and Gideon Sa'ar, are now respectively the Minister for Internal Affairs and the Minister of Justice. And in between the two of them, their mandate to actively pursue a policy of deportation of asylum seekers is almost unlimited. And it's something that they both said they're about to pursue. It's not just an old political message that they had there. It's actually part of what they're planning to do right now. Again, we'll have to see, will the left stand for it? Is that where the left draws the line in this coalition? Or will they say it's their ministry, it's their call? That is yet to be seen. But the same goes to, and both these people are former Netanyahu allies. Gideon Sa'ar, until recently, was part of Netanyahu's party, Likud. Ayelet Shaked was Netanyahu's chief of staff for a while, was running operations for him in different capacities, and was a minister under him after that. So the same goes for the Minister of Finance, Avigdor Lieberman, who has built his career on inciting against ultra-Orthodox communities and Palestinian communities. So these are the poorest communities in the country. And as Minister of Finance, his economic plan will have very dire impact on these poor communities. So we're definitely not looking at a promising government. These are all allies of Netanyahu. The way in which the right has taken hold on Israeli politics is very, very concerning, is very, very deep. And at the same time, like I said, it really is too early to know, just because we have other parts of this government and we don't yet know how far the right can actually promote its policies without meeting internal opposition.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned the left, which kind of brings me to my next question, which is, how is the left kind of able to mount? I mean, you mentioned that just the convenience of this coalition of getting Netanyahu out does provide an opening, which is really great, and a silver lining for the left in Israel that I feel like hasn't been seen for a long time. But you write in your piece in Plus 972 magazine, which I'd encourage everyone to check out, that 101 of the 120 Knesset seats are Jewish supremacist seats, and that's a significant percentage. I'm terrible at math, but that's a lot of right-wing Jewish supremacy seats, and I'm not even sure how one overcomes that, which is just, I mean, from a Palestinian perspective, that's incredibly daunting.
I agree. It's definitely troubling. But the interesting thing in this coalition is that those other 20, the more progressive voices that you have in Knesset, are actually, some of them or most of them are actually a part of the coalition. So that question of how much they intervene, they did go into this coalition with the main goal of getting rid of Netanyahu, but at the same time, now they're in power. The coalition depends on them. So just as Naftali Bennet, who commands only 6 seats in Knesset out of 120, was able to extract becoming prime minister, which is completely unheard of in Israeli politics, that the head of such a small party gets to be prime minister. And he was able to get that just because the others wanted to get rid of Netanyahu so badly. just as that happened, we now have the left that is part of this coalition. The coalition depends on the left, and it can draw a line. It can say, as we've seen before, or are seeing right now with the citizenship law, it can stop other policies from happening. It won't be able to stop each and every right-wing policy from happening because it doesn't want to lose power. It doesn't want this coalition to collapse. So it'll be a very, very interesting game of just where they decide to draw the line and where they give up. I'm afraid that one of the central pieces on which they are already giving up is the occupation. You don't see the left demanding removing the siege on Gaza or ending the occupation. They know they don't have enough power to make that happen. So it'll be in smaller policy questions, but the big questions of this reality of Israeli or Jewish supremacy, that is not something that's going to shift, unfortunately.
Which, you know, brings me to kind of where we'll wrap shortly is from your perspective, how does the left seize back power? I mean, what does it take? To me, based on my read of things and based on what I've read of your work, it's got to be some sort of international loss. The United States backing out of protecting Israel because of the violation of United Nations terms and human rights violations, etc. Perhaps, you know, adjusting its posture, which we are not seeing under Biden whatsoever, and its European allies doing the same. Would you imagine that that's kind of the moment that would spur some sort of change and a resurgent left? That would be the necessary kind of moment for that to happen?
So I think there are different external factors that might affect where the left is going. Definitely international pressure to end apartheid, which I think is an important thing in of itself, will change Israeli politics. The same can be said of a massive Palestinian uprising that will once again kind of force Israelis to contend with the reality of occupation, just how violent it is towards Palestinians when they need to contend with Palestinian resistance. So those two things are kind of external factors to Israeli politics. At the same time, I don't want to make it easier on the Israeli left by saying, just let's sit and wait until one of these external factors happens, and then, then we'll get this opportunity to make a difference. I think the left has a responsibility to actually make a stand, to go back to having a very explicit ideology and fighting for that ideology. What we've seen in recent years, essentially the left give up on most of its ideology to this point of anything but Netanyahu, accepting Bennett as a replacement for Netanyahu. And that is part of this the schism of the Israeli society that was formed around this one person. But with Netanyahu removed, Israeli politics can reorganize itself, hopefully. And a part of that has to be for the left to offer a comprehensive agenda, both of the occupation, but also a progressive social agenda and a progressive agenda on climate and on gender and on other issues within the Israeli society itself, and try and win support, as the left should do everywhere. So we've not seen something like that coming from the left in a very, very long time. The focus on just fighting back Netanyahu has been, I think, decapitating in many ways for the left. And now there's this opportunity to actually stand up and say, we want to fight for our own policies. And I think that's a huge burden on the people in coalition to make that struggle from within, or to say at some point, we can't go on with this coalition. We're selling out our values and prolonging not the rule of Netanyahu, but the rule of the right. And at some point, they would have to leave this coalition and say, we want an alternative.
Well, thank you so much, Haggai Matar, award-winning Israeli journalist and executive director of Plus 972 Magazine's Advancement of Citizen Journalism. People can find your work there. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you very much.
All right, we are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, Biden and gun control. So yesterday, Biden had an address, and he talked about a new gun control approach. I mean, this is not legislation in the House or the Senate because, by the way, you know, the Biden administration has decided it's not a huge priority for us to kind of strong arm Manchin or Sinema into adjusting the filibuster in any way, which means that any gun control measure in terms of legislation is pretty much dead on arrival. But, you know, Biden has some ideas about gun control, which I'm going to dissect shortly, I think are dangerous in many ways. Some of them are common sense, but the framing with which he approaches things is peculiar to me. Let's take a listen.
The Second Amendment from the day it was passed limited the type of people who could own a gun and what type of weapon you could own. You couldn't buy a cannon. Those who say the blood of patriots, you know, and all the stuff about how we're going to have to move against the government. Well, the tree of liberty is not water with the blood of patriots. What's happened is that there never been, if you wanted to think you need to have weapons to take on the government, you need F-15s and maybe some nuclear weapons. The point is that there's always been the ability to rationally limit the type of weapon that can be owned and who can own it.
Yeah, so Matt, I know you wanted to jump in there.
Well, the first limitation that comes to mind, like historically, is like, don't sell to the Native Americans. And like, even if it's just like the guns that you're willing to part with, right? Because the problem is like, I mean, look, I'm a little bit skeptical of this as an emphasis. I think like if you're going to do anything about guns in this country, it needs to be a massive structural thing where you're not just going after illegal like sales and stuff like that. Because guess who that's going to end up criminalizing? You're going to have to do something structurally about the arms industry, which the U.S. government sort of exists to facilitate business for. So like I'm skeptical of this as an emphasis right now, in the light of like what's not being done, right? Like is the PRO Act, that's just not something we're going to do now. We're not going to do anything on healthcare. This Pelosi's talking nice about the infrastructure, saying we're not going to do the bipartisan thing unless the reconciliation bill gets done. I'd love to see that happen, but I'm just skeptical because, I mean, and just to double back to the point about guns is like, there's a lot of communities for which, and I'm not saying this is smart, I think statistically you might accidentally, discharge your firearm and kill somebody with it, but there's a long history in this country of a need for, or a desire for a firearm for communal deterrence. Like, right? Like, like we get callers in who are like, I'm black, I like feel like having a firearm in my community is nice because I don't necessarily trust the police in case something happens, right? Like, and that's a problem with these need structural fixes and not just criminalizing certain types of behavior, in my opinion. And I think it's just risky politically. I think it speaks to like the Bloomberg type liberal who is a technocrat and is going to blow any kind of type of populism into the right.
Yeah, I mean, all of what you said makes sense. It's essentially, being tough on crime, criminalizing responses to poverty by, using that exact language where it's essentially owning the libertarian type who wants their AK-47 and not addressing root causes of what makes people unsafe. So as I mentioned or hinted at earlier, part of this proposal includes reallocating coronavirus funding to the police. So last summer, we had mass protests about defunding the police, and Biden has said this before, maybe we should give police more funding because then they can be better at their jobs, which is just so indicative of his small thinking on this kind of topic. No. They don't need more funding. You don't need to throw more finances at an institution that's structurally insufficient at the very least, but it's not just insufficient, it's murderous. And it's unable to meet the needs of the community and keep the community safe. If safety is truly the priority, and it's not just arming and giving more money to police departments for toys for them to play with, then what Biden should be doing is reallocating that coronavirus money that would be going towards police combating gun violence, and by the way, illegal gun sales. Like, talk about small thinking as well. It should be going towards housing. It should be going towards health care. It should be going towards infrastructure in high crime areas that allow people to go and be safe in. If safety is actually the priority, then you would be investing in housing number one, because a lot of what causes violence in these areas, and where we're seeing an increase in gun violence, and by the way, the rest of crime in 2020 went down. Rapes, etc., everything that didn't involve, or theft, I believe. I'm not exactly sure, but most of, and in other nations, crime went down in general in 2020 because people were indoors, even nations that had stricter lockdown measures. So, I mean, it's about targeting the root of these things as opposed to, as Matt said, giving a speech that kind of throws red meat at the Bloomberg types who want to hear about how stupid it is that right-wingers love guns. Yes, we need more gun control measures, but it's not going to be dealt with in a piecemeal way. You've got to abolish or amend the filibuster, and then we can have a conversation about gun control, because whatever Biden's doing here, it's insufficient at the minimum. And mostly what it's doing is just giving more money to cops, which is exactly what activists and the left did not want. It's counterproductive. And I mean, like, the exact wrong response to what we saw over the summer with the George Floyd protesting goes to show that the Democratic Party was not interested in doing anything legislatively about this. They saw the conviction of Derek Chauvin and they said, thank God, there's no pressure on us to actually put legislation through. What, Matt?
I was just saying, absolutely.
Yeah, and they want to fundraise off of this. They want to fundraise off gun violence, and they want to fundraise off of Black Lives Matter and not really do anything about it. I mean, they're complacent in that area. So Biden's putting together this very tiny package about gun violence that does not address root causes, that might criminalize people who are already hurting, and they're going to say, okay, we're done with it. But, like, glad he got to own right-wingers in that statement. Maybe I'm being too harsh, but to me, this is just, like, indicative of many larger problems by Joe Biden. But that is our show today. Have a wonderful day. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Brendan. We'll see you tomorrow.
All right. Should I bring in
except if
Brandon? We'll bring Matt and Brandon in now.
That was a good fake out, Emma.
Well, one.
Your redirection after the first hour, I feel like it was much more, it's good, better head fake than Sam's.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's just, for some reason, he just, like, he hasn't mastered it yet. We've been doing this for many, many months at this point. I love shitting on him when he's not here. Hey, Brandon.
Hey, you mean me or Matt?
Both of you.
I prefer to be shit on when I'm here.
Well, I mean,
so John McAfee.
Now I'm too cowardly, so.
Well, you know, honestly, I lost a train of thought on that one. Sorry.
So I'm on Sam's computer here, and I just see Velveteen Rabbit buttons in the Google search.
I mean, I don't even know what that means. I'm not a spring chicken anymore, but that reference went over my head.
Yeah, no one got it. I think I'm more and more convinced that there is some sort of anti-Semitism behind it.
I think,
yeah.
Frankly, I would never go on Steven Crowder's show because I'd be afraid that he'd call me some like slur I wouldn't recognize because it was from the 1940s. Like, right. Like, oh, you know, I got a moon cricket on my show, and you're like, what? Like, I'm sorry, is that a slur, or are you you know, have you heard about my persona?
You know, with the Peanuts one, at first I was like, okay, well, you know, he monitors this show pretty heavily. Maybe he saw the Letter Hacks Peanuts version of the Majority Report.
Damn, I hadn't thought of
that. but then his co-host brings up the Solus thing. And when you combine that with the eye references, then I think you have a much clearer picture of what's going on here.
Well, what a week. How are you, Matt? And what's happening on Doomed?
I'm doing good. It's been quite the week to just watch unfold. All these articles about Sam Seder owning Steven Crowder. It's pretty crazy.
Forbes magazine.
And Forbes, right? And Newsweek and Vice, and but all those are liberal rags.
Did you have a conflict of interest? Is that why you couldn't write about it at Mashable?
Yeah, I probably would not be able to write about that one. Yeah. or I would needed full disclosure up front. I actively work for this man and rooted him on during the debate. Anyway, youtube.com/Matt Binder. Tonight will be a great show at 9 p.m. Eastern time. I am working on the guest, but it's going to be a great show. Some weeks, you have a guest up front really early. Other times you grab one at the last minute. But I have a number of interesting things coming up in the works that I should drop now because it'll cement them to happen. One is one of the guys from Convo Couch, one of those super door-esque leftist quote unquote shows wants to debate me about why we should reach out to the Boogaloo Boys.
Okay.
And this is one of the guys who was decided that seeing Steven Crowder and Sam Seder go at each other meant that would be a great time to try to own Sam for some reason. I mean, I don't get leftists like that. You don't like Sam, fine, but that's a weird opportunity to go after him, sort of cements where you stand, right?
Lots of purported Jimmy Dore fans in my mentions saying how Sam was wrong to ambush Crowder. I'm like, well...
Right, really weird. And then also, I mean, I know lesser people than I are banned, but Tim Pool is in touch with me to have me go out to the Tim Pool house in July.
Oh, God.
We'll see what happens with that. I am super open to it. And obviously I reached out to him and he reached out to me. And we are going to hopefully actually make it happen.
Well, that sounds lovely. Brandon, what is happening over on the discourse?
Well, we actually just put out another episode. And I say actually because it's always a surprise to me included when a new one comes out on the SoundCloud. So you can head over there. Cops in Kente Cloth. Is the name of the episode. I love alliteration, unless that's not alliteration, it's something else that I don't know about. I will say I don't know about this Tim Pool character, other Matt, but I always find his branding to be so confusing. Like, is the house not called the Pool House? Is he some sort of YouTuber who has one of those YouTube prankster houses? Like, shouldn't it be called the Pool House?
It's called like the Beanie something, isn't it? Because of his
it's like the compound of some name. I don't even remember what it's called.
I only know him through osmosis, but I just feel like all of his stuff should be pool themed. Like, his podcast should be called The Deep End or like The Shallow End with Tim Pool or like, The Pool House. Like, it writes itself. It's really, these are easy layups.
Oh yeah. Do you remember he was coming out with a sports drink and it should have been called Pool Water?
Yes, you were. Yeah,
that'd have been good.
You think so?
I mean, people always tell me I'm dropping the ball by not taking my last name and making everything a Mitt Romney binders full of women reference. But I mean,
that's not as much.
It is what it is.
As the Pool thing.
I think of Binder and I think of that class action law firm.
Right. I think they're Social Security lawyers.
Oh, okay.
They're actually very, very, very distant cousins to my dad. I've never met them.
There you go.
I've never met them.
Well, with that said, Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning?
Oh, yeah. Napoleon the Legend on tonight at 8 Eastern. We're going to be talking about Biden's infrastructure stuff. We'll see what the state of play at that is this evening. Also be talking about the miners bringing the fight to NYC, the socialist mayor in Buffalo, the boarding. The U.S. is now going to investigate their own boarding schools. There's another revelation of a mass grave in Canada this morning. I think 700 bodies or something like that this time. So the U.S. is going to investigate there. So all that tonight, 8 Eastern, Left Reckoning, patreon.com/Left Reckoning to get the post game.
All right, 646-257-3920. Binder is going to be responsible for the calls today because I'm having some difficulty on my end. So you have all the power in the world, Binder. Just
I'm assuming the systems are still recovering from Sam Seder being teleported into the Steven Crowder show's stream.
Yes, the computers were working overtime. Again, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
You are in for it. All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it to my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ Danner.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. You see white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males,
psych, fuck them. Snowflake says what? Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter.
Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are black. And the Africans are back.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on, fuck them. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy.
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are black. Africans are back.
Come on. Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
Back.
We are back. Mail time.
What is that from?
Blue's Clues.
Is that Blue's Clues? Right? Yeah. I watch so many kid shows now, I can't remember. Like even my own memory.
Is Blue's Clues still in rotation?
They got
they have a new Steve too.
Wow, is his name Steve?
No, I think it's. Let me look it up actually.
It's kind of like a Highlander situation. There can only be one Steve, so the new host of the Blue's Clues has to decapitate the old Steve in order to become host of Blue's Clues.
Did something happen with the old Steve?
No, he just stopped being Steve because he kind of aged out of it, and he's like in a band. I think something happened to him after the Blue's Clues thing, but that wasn't the cause of him leaving. No.
No, but that was like an urban legend.
Okay, that's maybe what I'm remembering. Yeah.
I think he shaved his head and joined a punk band or started a punk band.
When we were growing up, there was some urban legend that Steve from Blue's Clues was, a murderer or something stupid. I don't know.
Well, it's the same thing with Mr. Rogers, that like all his sweaters covered up tattoos that marked his like kills in Vietnam or something like that.
I didn't hear that. I mean, did you do the one about Marilyn Manson and like his ribs? That was another urban legend.
Oh, well, and also Marilyn Manson was the kid from was that old show, Happy Days or Happy Years or.
Oh, right. Happy Days. Oh my, you didn't know the name Happy Days?
I don't.
Jeez, I feel old now, and I'm not that much older than you.
I wasn't a big Blue's Clues kid. That was like after my time. I watched like Zaboomafoo and Arthur. You know, speaking of Steven Crowder, I watched Arthur. You know, Long Fall for the Brain.
I didn't know
I liked
that
Arthur.
was him.
Yeah,
Brain does all right. Yeah,
for a little while.
My kids' shows were Pee-wee's Playhouse, Eureka's Castle, Zoobilee Zoo. I don't know if anyone remembers that one. I guess I'm just that much older than you guys.
The way Crowder makes old-timey racist slurs, you're like making two old-timey references for kids shows.
I watched the Big Comfy Couch.
The Big Comfy Couch is good, but they're correcting us in the chat. It wasn't Marilyn Manson was in Happy Days. It was that he was the kid from, he was the doofy kid, the geeky kid from Wonder Years.
Okay, right. I honestly, like, I have no idea how to distinguish Happy Days from Wonder Years.
I watched neither of those shows growing up.
Yeah.
Oh, Wonder Years was kind of dark and depressing at times. Happy Days, not so much. Happy Days was just like your basic like.
Yeah. Sorry, I thought you were
sitcom.
done. Happy Days.
No, go ahead.
I lost this but someone asked me how many wins I think the Eagles will get this year, and I'm going to say 4 in the 17-game season. Ray says, with Binder going to debate Tim Pool in person soon, someone should make a Matt Binder mask for Sam so he could ambush Tim Pool as well.
No, don't. I don't want to make any problems. I want to go. Don't even suggest anything of the sort. I don't want him thinking that's going to happen, because it's not, because I'm going to go in person, and he could do that to me. He could sit me down and open door number 2, and out can come out whoever he'd like. I don't care.
Who would be like the right wing's like ringer for debating? They're all terrible at like talking about their ideas with people who don't already believe terrible things. Like is Jordan Peterson going to walk out and misremember Marx?
Oh, right. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you're right. There's no one I could think of. That I would see walk through that door and go, oh no, it's so and so. What a nightmare! I mean, there's no one. Surprise! In fact, I'd probably be like excited if one of their like intellectuals showed up. Like if Ben Shapiro walked out door number 2, I'd be like, this is even better than I thought.
Funky Town Tony says, Binder calling from an 817 area code and want to talk about lion pigs. And then Matt Binder's full of women says Tim Pool's show should be called The Floater. Like in
what's the area code that wanted to take the call?
817. So if you want to grab that, we can take a call and then we can get into clips.
Yeah, let's do it.
Oh yeah, let me just do a quick correction. I said mass grave. I meant unmarked graves. About the residential school discovery this morning, revelation.
817, you're on the air. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Tony from Texas. How you doing today, MR crew?
Hey, how you doing, everybody? Here's Tony.
Yep.
Am I coming through all right? Awesome.
Yep, perfect. Now, your voice sounds very familiar. Your name sounds very familiar. Tony, I believe, is a regular caller into my show, Doomed. How you doing, Tony? What would you like to talk about here on MR?
Doing great, and you are correct. It is a regular listener and call in at Doomed, regular MR listener as well. Love all the work that y'all do. And I want to talk about the outsized and really gross influence that police officer associations have on local politics. I was deeply embroiled in voter outreach for the local election in Fort Worth, Texas. We managed to help get 2 progressive candidates elected to city council, but boy, we got on the POA's radar, and they were sending out all sorts of BS mailers and propaganda to all the different communities that we were in, and trying to get out and activate folks. Fort Worth has got a really terrible history of voter turnout, like a lot of places in the U.S. Voter turnout was like 3% in 2019. But the work that the organization that I was a part of and several other groups, we managed to get a 14.5% voter turnout in this last election, and very nearly elected the first female Black mayor of Fort Worth in Fort Worth history. But the racist runoff election rules that are common in the South gave the moneyed interests and the Police Officer Association plenty of opportunity to, get all those white votes out against the candidate of color for the mayor. So it was really uplifting to be a part of groups doing some really good direct work. Electoralism's got its limits, but every voice that we get onto city council is, a step towards being able to make substantial structural changes to the way things are done, so that we get, our communities actually taken care of. Fort Worth is home to the zip code with the lowest life expectancy in all of Texas, which for a city the size of ours is really egregious. Right. And some of the things that, the cops are including were, kind of like we all were talking about, like crime statistics over COVID. They're crying, murder's gone up so much %, blah, blah, blah. This has gone up so much % since the defund the police movement and all that kind of stuff, even though there's been like absolutely no legislation or material changes to the police funding in Fort Worth or many of the other kind of places that they listed on their propaganda.
Right here in New York this year, actually, with our local elections that just happened, the police union sort of had a tampered, tamped down, I guess you could say. They don't really hold the same power here in terms of, and they didn't really even come out for any candidate. I think at the last minute, the PBA went with Andrew Yang. They don't like Eric Adams, even though he's a former cop, because he was like one of those guys who was in like one of those groups. I think it was like 100 Black officers for police reform, which is like, still a pro cop group, but they somewhat sort of say that like, we need reform. Things aren't right. We still need cops to do what they do, but we could do it. It's like sort of how he comes out and says how stop and frisk was being used wrong. It's a great tool other than that, though, besides the fact that it was being used to subjugate Black and Latino men to these horrible conditions and just invasion of their space and privacy and freedom, and just being held up against the wall for no reason and patted down and groped and grabbed. Besides that, it's a great tool, he would say.
Right. Yeah, and it's that kind of like BS and hypocrisy that like really frustrates the shit out of me. The lady who did wind up winning Fort Worth mayoral seat, Maddie Parker, her biggest backers were the Fort Worth Police Officer Association and a handful of Fort Worth billionaires who bought the seat for her. I mean, their campaign outspent Deborah Peoples by like, I think $500,000 to $1 million, and still barely won the runoff by about 5,500, 6,000 votes out of almost 130,000 votes. It was frustrating, but like one of the things that really got my goat, I don't know if y'all are familiar with Tatiana Jefferson, who was a few years back shot in her home by a Fort Worth police officer while she was playing video games with her nephew. And yeah, it is. Yeah, really, really gross, egregious, like police violence. And a part of why that happened, like structurally, is because like the city of Fort Worth negotiates certain like protocols and things with the Police Officer Association, and they got a rule established some years back where senior officers get shift preference. So, the longer you're on the force, the more you get to choose like when and where you're working. And so all the senior officers wind up taking shifts in the daytime in the more affluent neighborhoods and leave the rookies by themselves to work the late night shifts in the more neglected and poor communities where crime is a little more prevalent. And they don't have that more like level-headed, like senior, there's no safety net for them or anything like that. They're just out there by themselves, these rookies, and making really poor, inexperienced calls. And that it was that situation that led to Tatiana Jefferson being murdered in her home while minding her own business. And Maddie Parker, before she got the mayoral seat, she was our former mayor, Betsy Price's, one of her staffers and like her protege. And Maddie Parker handled the last renegotiation with the POA about these kinds of policies and left that specific policy in place.
Right.
So that's still that issue that led to her death is still a present problem. And it's really frustrating.
I hear you
I've got
completely. I know
one of my best.
Tony, I'm gonna have to. I know you're probably used to the long form calls on Doom.
I don't want to take up time, but I appreciate y'all taking the call.
Let me just thank you for calling in, and hopefully I'll talk to you some more tonight. Take care, Tony.
Yeah, I'll call in tonight. Take care.
All right, guys, you want to get some clips?
Sure thing. I mean, there's just, oh God, this is the one I want to get to first, if that's okay. This OAN clip. So, OAN had an insane segment. They're still talking about how the election was stolen from Donald Trump, as is the way. And the anchor here, do we know this guy's name? Nope. Well, regardless, I think the clip speaks for itself. He essentially, at the end of it, calls for something horrific to happen to everybody who understands that the election was not stolen on behalf of Joe Biden.
Which raises even more questions about exactly how many people were involved in these efforts to undermine the election. Hundreds? Thousands? Tens of thousands? How many people does it take to carry out a coup against the presidency? And when all the dust settles from the audit in Arizona and the potential audits in Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Nevada, and Wisconsin, what happens to all these people who were responsible for overthrowing the election? What are the consequences for traitors who meddled with our sacred democratic process and tried to steal power by taking away the voices of the American people? What happens to them? Well, in the past, America had a very good solution for dealing with such traitors: execution.
Oh my God. Well, I like how he delivered that line there.
Yeah, he just said, execute everybody who does not believe that the ghost of Hugo Chavez, Ghost in the Machine, went in, twiddled with things, made sure that Donald Trump lost, and either keep harping on this Arizona audit, which is a completely performative process for GOP electoral purposes. I mean, the idea that is allowed on television, the calling of executions of people who just respected the democratic process. I mean, you can't ignore this stuff because this is what people legitimately believe. And a poll came out the other day that said 1/3 of Americans think voter fraud contributed to Joe Biden's victory. So this kind of stuff is penetrating, and it's just the Fox News model. You repeat it, you repeat it, you repeat it, you repeat it, you repeat it. Critical race theory, critical race theory, critical race theories. Now they're talking about it in Congress. Now they're talking about it with Mark Milley, whatever the case may be. Like, this is just I have nothing more to say. It's nuts.
By the way, the host there is Pearson Sharp. Just wanted to put that out there. Pearson.
That is not a real name. Pearson. That's a porn name. Pearson Sharp. Come on.
Did you know that? Did you know who he was? Do you know?
Oh
him
no,
by
I looked it up and I think I came across it before, so I was able to just go in my history and
my favorite
I should
part,
remember a name like Pearson Sharp, but I didn't. So I just went
my
in my
favorite
browser
part
history and found
of that clip was how they had the My Pillow code at the bottom, where it's like, while we're calling for executions of voters, you can, you know, put in execute the traitors at My Pillow and get like 40% off your, you know, pillow at checkout. So you know, it really speaks to it's just a grift. You know, I think that the fact that we've gotten to the point where grifting now calls for the explicit execution of, you know, people who vote the wrong way on, I guess, what is considered to be mainstream television by some people is frightening, but we've been going in that direction for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, and what's crazy too is if you replay it or if you listen to what he's saying, he's talking about how it was a coup, how these people are traitors. I mean, is there some sort of irony alarm that can go off behind his head? I mean, like, hello, dude, hello.
I feel like it's ironic that when Matthews called for the execution of capitalists in Central Park on MSNBC, they took him off air. And now, you know, you're calling for execution of Democratic voters. That's just allowed. Well, it's double standard.
Matthews wasn't even, he was saying that that's what Bernie Sanders wanted, right? But now I guess you get a cable spot on OAN if you're saying that we should do that en masse to people who voted for Joe Biden. I mean, it's not even necessarily clear who he's calling for there.
Matthews couched it as his, you know, fear of being executed for a fascist, but I could tell in the manic glee in his eye, he was actually wistful for the idea. You know, I felt a kinship with him there, and that's why I'm still lamenting him being kicked off for just sharing his ideas.
It's pretty incredible to me how OAN is propped up by basically just a few cable companies. I mean, literally, that's where all their funding comes from. They don't have the advertisers Fox has. They don't have, you know, their fingers in many different pots, you know, their hands and you know, they're making money on this end and that end. No, they just have OAN. They, you know, they're basically, and they don't have, you know, all they have basically are companies like AT&T and Comcast paying them carrier fees, which means if you subscribe to those cable companies, every time you pay them your cable bill, they give a few bucks from that fee from you to OAN. And that's really where OAN gets all their money. That's it. They don't have what Fox News has, where they have very many income streams. It's just unbelievable how, like, you know, this hasn't been really focused on at all, really. I mean, I know people have covered this, but you know, there were all those big, you know, Flush Rush and all those other movements back over the years, but there's been nothing where like OAN doesn't even have the ability to like really fight that if people just focused on what's propping this organization up.
I'm surprised. They seem like the kind of place where you watch like 5 minutes and they start talking about buying gold. They just give off that like buy gold, buy silver vibe. Right. But
I don't know if it's just that they don't have that many viewers to be asking for that much money from those companies. Like they are able to just get this ridiculous sum from these cable companies for every subscriber. Like, it's just like you're not subscribing to OAN and they're getting a percentage of that split with Comcast. I mean, literally everyone who subscribes to cable via these companies, even if you don't watch OAN, a couple of dollars from your monthly cable bill goes to OAN. So like they don't have the support that's propping them up. They have this stupid cable scheme. I mean, that's why the cable bills always rise, because each company negotiates with the cable company and says, hey, for every subscriber you have, every single cable box that our channel is just available on, not that you watch it, just available on, we want this amount of money. And they negotiate that fee, obviously, but it's a fee that's going to OAN whether you watch them or not if you subscribe to the companies that carry them.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's like I scroll past it. I have Verizon cable, but I pay too much money because I got to watch sports, guys. I apologize. But I mean, that's something that, yeah, I think you make a good point, Bender. People, are paying whatever money to their telecommunications companies to fund this kind of garbage, even if it's indirectly. And, you know, that's something that could be a sort of movement. I don't want my dollars going towards that.
Right. I mean, listen, I totally, for the free speech warriors out there, I totally get that companies should be able, OAN has the right to exist, obviously. Fox News does. But what I'm saying is OAN is propped up by people who aren't even watching it.
I don't think they have the right to exist. I disagree with that. I think that in other countries, they would not be allowed to exist the way that they do. I think that Fox News and OAN and a lot of the content that we have is actually incredibly radical to have on air. And we never really address it because of the existence of free speech warriors. But like, you know, there are tweets and people who are banned from tweeting in Germany, who are banned from tweeting in like France because of their free speech laws, because of their, you know, not anti-hate crime laws. And to pretend that America is more free than Germany or France or any of those countries is a joke. That's a joke. People die in the streets here from not having enough money for food. That's a joke.
Right, right. I want to amend. I just want to amend that. I don't think they're free to have like a platform and cable. Like I'm saying, you know, if they want to pay for their own servers and put stuff up there and talk, I mean, then you know, who I agree with you too. But I mean, at the same time, you know, if people's money doesn't want to go to funding that, then people should do something about it. To be quite frank,
I agree. I mean, I think that's a great idea. Podcast coming soon says, outside of political junkies, I find very, very few people that know anything about OANN. I mean, but like I've met some Trumpies that like that program.
I forget how many N's are in OANN as well, kind of like Tennessee. So I
here's the thing.
That.
There is no incorrect. It's not either. Is not incorrect. They actually use both because
you can put as many N's in it as you want.
It's OAN. It's technically OANN because it's One America News Network. But everybody, including themselves, OAN, calls it OAN.
Yeah. Cower with Crowder says the OAN nutter doesn't seem to understand irony. That's what I said earlier. If anything, Drumpf and his lackeys are traitors. Father from Homunculus says, what hockey podcast was Emma on? Also, last night's win for the Islanders after losing 8-0 was freaking amazing. Yeah, I was on the Blue Shirts Breakaway. It's a Rangers podcast. It's like probably the only team I can speak authoritatively on. But yeah, I mean, it was a nuts game. They came back from down 2-0 and they won in OT. The talent gap's insane, but they're just so well coached. So it's hard not to like the Islanders this year. Animal Psyche says, any book recommendations, fiction, non-graphic, etc. I'll punt that to Matt.
Me? Oh, yeah, I'm about to say, wrong. We're talking about books, wrong Matt.
Gosh, off the top of my head, my reading is so specific. I'm like reading about slavery in the upper Mississippi Valley right now. So as far as general reading, I would say JFK and the Unspeakable.
I think the MR audience would really enjoy The Sellout by Paul Beatty, and it's hilarious and it's very appropriate in terms of like the politics of our show, and it's incredibly readable and well written in terms of like literary styling. So I would check that out, and it's fast too.
Yeah, I was trying to find it, and it's like they only have it in hardcover. Maybe I have a Kindle, so maybe I'll get it there. But you mentioned that before, Brendan.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for whenever Boots Riley gets the rights to make the movie now.
I started the 3 Body Problem because my friend recommended it to me. But like the whole first 2 chapters are just like Red Scare propaganda. But it's about aliens, so I don't even know where the hell it's going. But I mean, I like, you know, sci-fi or not even sci-fi. I shouldn't say that. I like fantasy. So I thought maybe I'd like this, but it's the political underpinnings of it seem questionable.
I have a recommendation. I only really read really horror fiction and science fiction and then like really dense social sciencey texts. But I have been reading the Imago sequence by Laird Barron, and I would suggest that if you like horror, very like cosmic-y, very sort of Lovecraftian in nature.
Ooh, Lovecraftian. That's it's very hot these days.
Oh, you know what? I'll do another one. Warlock by Oakley Hall. It's a sort of like Western style, OK Corral sort of vibe going on there, but there's like a minor strike going on. I would recommend that for now.
Someone's just saying, isn't the book in Chinese? It is a Chinese book, but it's sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. But it's translated very well, and I think you still kind of get the gist.
Want to go back to the phones?
Sure.
Let's take a call and then we'll go to another clip. 647. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Warren from Toronto.
Hi, Warren from Toronto. What would you like to talk about today? Yep, you're on the air.
Hi. Oh, hi, everybody. Yeah, so I want to talk about another unfortunate thing that happened in Canada. And thanks for Matt for just mentioning that the unmarked graves found. That's going to keep on going on, unfortunately, as the search continues. But a couple weeks ago, in London, Ontario, where I went to university, there is an anti-Muslim attack. A 20-year-old man, he ran over a family of 5 as they're out for their evening walk. Oh, I'm sorry?
I was just said, right, I heard about this. It's horrible, horrible.
Yeah, so it killed 4 of them, and the child was injured. He was in critical care. He's going to be okay. And luckily, the community's rallying around him, and police instantly confirmed that he had anti-Muslim intentions with the attack. And right now, so he's in trial. There's a publication ban. And while we don't know, kind of similar to the mosque shooting, where it was apparent that that person followed a lot of Ben Shapiro. What a surprise. And right-wing media. We don't necessarily know that for sure in this case with the perpetrator, because there's a publication ban. I'm sure we could probably infer. I do just kind of want to mention to everybody, and it's something that I think MR hits really well, is that the solution to these, to kind of prevent these, it isn't going forward with more anti-terrorism laws, not even necessarily hate crime laws, because we have a bunch of laws in place that will, certain that can punish these people well enough already. To me, the way we're going to attack this is just through culture. And as mentioned a lot through Facebook, right? The top 10 articles are always Fox News, Dan Bongino. And as we saw, even with, honestly, just a straight up factual statement by Ilhan Omar, people are calling her to deport her right away. Right. And luckily some of her colleagues stood up for that. But and some people might be thinking, oh, like you're from Canada. And the reality is, especially in Toronto, it might be different in other provinces, and London, which is Ontario as well. We're so influenced by American media, it's crazy. But like I'm in law school, and early on, some of the professors asked, how many of the American Supreme Court justices could you name? Most of us could name a few. And how many of the Canadian Supreme Court justices could you name? And a lot of us, until you start your readings, can't even name that, right? Like that is just how much how much more people are familiar with American politics, even if you don't follow it, than Canadian politics. And I guess just not to ramble, but just
to your point about where
it's attacking these social media.
To your point about where they're, what the solution, to what your solution is to this, absolutely, in terms of like, they're going to certainly, if they haven't already, I'm pretty sure they have, though, talk about giving more money to the police and trying to, counter terrorism. But like those things never or rarely ever stop actual attacks or anything like that. If the point is to prevent these from happening if the point is to let these happen and then just really punish the offenders as like some sort of, to send a message, which we've seen, time and time again, doesn't work in any way, shape, or form, then you can go ahead and continue to have these attacks happen. People die, lives ruined, lives lost. and just continue to funnel more money to the cops. Or you could realize that they don't prevent these things from happening. And what we want to do is to prevent them from happening in the first place.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And a big part of it is antitrust, regulating these algorithms on Facebook and these social media companies, getting rid of the recommended filter, making it purely chronological. And that's how we attack it systemically, as shown with the recent Crowder events. I think that's a great way to use, the power of a platform like an MR and a Sam Seder to attack the credibility of people like this and exit that right-wing echo chamber, which pretty much acts like, Muslims are taking over in America and Muslims are inherently evil and all of that, acting like they're the otherizing them, acting like they're the enemy. And so that's great when platforms like you attack the credibility of those influencers. But if we're ever going to have systemic change, at the end of the day, if Facebook and YouTube don't change their algorithms to make sure people like Crowder and Ben Shapiro don't get all that traffic, maybe a Crowder or a Ben Shapiro, their influence would wane, but unfortunately another one's going to take their place. So when it happens, talking to some of my non-political friends, even just people I know who might even lean right, and I talk about solutions from this, and I would just say, let's get these social media companies. And from that perspective, they're very open to that argument. It's just not in the lexicon yet, the average person's lexicon. Even in my classes, when I bring up a lot of this and regulating these social media companies, antitrust, anti-competition law, which is typically what it's referred to in Canada, that's not brought up. Breaking up these companies, attacking it through that way. That is just not part of everybody's vocabulary in terms of solutions.
Right.
So that's what I just say to the viewers is that,
Yeah, Warren, thank you so much for the call. We're a little bit delayed, so I'm going to let you go and say a few last things about this. But really appreciate the call. I agree.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good one. Bye.
I always think about, what would happen? How would things be if the one thing these social media companies had done from the beginning is just not use an algorithm to push certain things based on engagement to force people to stay on the site. If all these terrible right-wingers who eventually, after years and years of spreading this stuff, who got banned, if all of them were on this platform from the beginning and they never had these algorithms pushing the outrage factory videos and the contrarian takes that are just there to get people, the reactionary views all hyped up, I wonder how much different things would have been. You probably wouldn't have even need to ban them. You probably wouldn't have need to even take action against them, because the facts of the matter are, most of them probably wouldn't have even risen to a level of being a problem, because there would have been no audience there for them. But the algorithms do exist, and they did do this very thing that I'm talking about. And so here we are.
I agree, but I also find it's a little, we can't blame it entirely on the algorithm, because at some point a person was standing there making the decision to take money from PragerU, from, the Epic Times, for ads and promotional materials. A lot of this is a money-making scheme. A lot of this is right-wing corporations who have money to pump into Facebook ads, pump into, YouTube ads to draw attention from other videos based on video games or comic books that, may happen to have the population that they're looking to attract commonly watching them, right? I know when I watch video game trailers on YouTube, there's it used to be a flip of a coin before I started using VPNs and ad blocks, whether or not I got a PragerU ad or Epic Times ad, and regardless of what else I was watching. And to the caller's point, I think that the urge to put faith in anti-carceral racism, and anti-racist carceralism rather, because I would anti-racist carceralism, by that I mean put money into the police, put money into prisons to solve the issue of hate crimes, to solve the issue of racism, or to say basically carceral feminism by putting money into cops to solve issues of misogyny, of sexual assault. It all leads to the same place, which is not very productive, because cops don't solve crimes really, they just exist to show up late and shrug their shoulders when you tell them what happened. But also these systems are built on that kind of thing. Our prison system, our police system is built on the remnants of the slave state. You know, they're built on old patriarchal norms, and it's hard to find a solution within that paradigm without radical reform to the point of which we're talking about abolition, you know, basically dissolving what we have now and building up something new. And what you're talking about in terms of like the change relying more on culture is exactly why the right wing goes after any changes to school curriculum at the, you know, kindergarten or elementary school level. It's why they don't want you to teach sex ed in high school. It's why they don't want you to teach critical race theory in elementary school or just even to integrate schools, because the idea that you might get kids normalized into a diverse society, teach them empathetic critical thinking is the first step to actually integrating society fully. And they know that. And then that's why they're always complaining about people being indoctrinated by liberal movies and liberal commercials. They're afraid of that normalization. And that's why they're trying to move us back towards normalizing fascism and race science. That's a thing you have to allow too if you're going to have interracial relationships in Cheerios commercials.
Right. You know, that's definitely spot on. I think the thing is, I feel like people feel sort of powerless outside of those cultural issues. Like that's where you can actually do something and try to, like, you know, look at what the caller was arguing in terms of like taking action against the big tech companies. Like even that, obviously the big tech companies, how are you going to go after them? But actually probably not even probably, it is definitely easier actually in this political environment to go after the big tech companies because both parties want to go after the big tech companies right now. So we're seeing that something is actually going to be done. Whether, you know, the Republicans have the same thing in mind as the Democrats, that's obviously not true, but the tech companies will be dealing with some sort of fallout from this. Whereas I feel like, you know, what can we do about these institutional right-wing companies and these giant organizations, as I should say, and these giant moneyed backers who fund all these things on the right? I mean, really, when it comes to that, you know, we sort of are more powerless in a sense.
No, I agree. I think there's a level of powerlessness in our situation because we don't have a functional government that listens to, you know, individuals and their concerns, right? And I think that sometimes people present that, or like they take that reality that, hey, we don't have a government that listens to us. They don't want to do what 90% of the people say because they're beholden to special interests. They take that and they transform it into a, you know, sometimes rational, sometimes irrational way to like, how do we affect change in this company that has no accountability to us? And the answer is, unfortunately, at the individual level, there are just certain problems that are too big for you. You know, there are certain problems that are too big for you at the individual level, at the local level, at the municipal level, at the state level, like climate change. You can't fight climate change by making climate change laws only in New York State. That just doesn't work. But I think we've been taught by the fact that we have been abandoned by a lot of these people whose job it is to basically hold institutions large enough accountable that we have the ability to like change the way Twitter operates in any real way. Like, we don't. We don't have that ability. I think that's also important to realize that when people talk about, you know, free speech and like you can't call for people to be banned from Twitter and, you know, we have to show solidarity to X, Y, and Z right-wing person, the answer is like, well, there's nothing that won't do anything, actually. The only thing we can do about Twitter banning people or Facebook banning people unfairly is to have a functional left-wing government. Anything but that, I don't think that's going to work. So like any argument to doing something but that to me speaks like, well, you just want to have right-wing friends. You want to support right-wing media or the ability for, like, you know, let's be honest, independent content creators to make any kind of media they want without repercussions, because that's just the way some people make their money. But again, that doesn't lead to a functional left-wing government or a functional society. It just leads to a handful of, you know, content creators making money.
Right. Hello, Emma. Is there a clip you want to get to?
Sure.
I just noticed you reappeared.
Misfit Black Girl says, as a side note, I always appreciate Brandon's contributions. They are both insightful and have good comedic timing. Emma Pub Owner says, I like when the crew gets stun locked and Emma tries her hardest to shut everyone down to not make the show 3 hours. Yes, well, you know, people forget I have this other interview show I got to do after. And unlike Sam, I can't just go into it cold and like shoot the shit. I got to prepare. So there's that. Abu Mancho says, Emma, don't bail on 3 Body. Waiting through the Cultural Revolution part is worth it, both story-wise and politically. That's what I needed to hear. 10 Lawn Gnome says, thoughts on the NCAA losing their case on student athlete compensation. I'm absolutely thrilled, although there's a long way to go. Anyway, yeah, let's get to some of those clips. We do have a little bit of breaking news, I believe.
There's breaking news? I missed it.
Somewhat. Rudy Giuliani has been suspended from practicing law.
Oh, I saw that.
Can no longer practice law, and his fail son, who's trying to ride his coattails suddenly after I believe their relationship was not the best and they were not on speaking terms. Now he's back in the political fold, wants to run for governor, thinks he can take on whoever the Democratic nominee is. Hopefully it's not Andrew Cuomo. Here is Rudy Giuliani's not so bright son commenting on this.
Should also note, if he doesn't have a future in politics, he definitely has a future in work.
In what work?
Hi, my fellow Americans. Today it's my fellow Americans, not just my fellow New Yorkers. As you may have heard recently, a few minutes ago, my father's law license was suspended by the New.
Did you, Brendan? You cut out. Did you say he has a future in camera work? Because talk about headroom. Talk about headroom. Go back.
It makes a tree look like a big hair, like a lot of hair on his head.
What?
The cinematography is beautiful.
Yeah. What director is this?
Yeah.
It just screams. This just screams. I don't have one friend to hold the camera. Like I don't have one friend to hold the camera. There's obviously that other wall. Like you see in the background, it's probably a corresponding wall facing him, and he just has like a tripod on it.
Or the top of his car. It's like his phone on top of his car.
Or on like a windowsill or something.
It honestly makes him look like a little boy. He looks like a little boy.
I want to see some film goers. What directors do shots like this? There's got to be some. It looks artistic almost.
It's like a Neil Breen. It's a Neil Breen classic. I love a good Breen film. Let me think. Who directed The Room again? Oh, Tommy Wiseau.
Oh yeah,
another classic.
Classic Wiseau.
All right, go on.
Hi, my fellow Americans. Today it's my fellow Americans, not just my fellow New Yorkers. As you may have heard recently, a few minutes ago, my father's law license was suspended by the New York State First Appellate Division of the Supreme Court. Now, the 5 judges that ruled on it, Judge Rolanda Acosta, Judge Diane Renwick, Judge Sally Manzart Daniels, Judge Judith Gishi, and Judge Barbara Kaepernick. All 5 of them are Democrats, 3 of which were appointed by Andrew Cuomo. 5-0, ultimately. Democrats with 0 Republicans on there. Again, this is just unbelievable to see just how politicized all of this has become. I am infuriated by all of this, and any American that believes in an independent justice system, this is going after one of President Trump's closest allies. That's exactly what this is. And any American that doesn't believe that, they are just biased. This is unacceptable, and I stand by my father. He did everything ultimately by the book, and the fact that there would be this politicization in our Justice Department is disgusting. It is a cancer that needs to be cut out, and it needs to be cut out right now. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned. I'll have more statements later in the day.
I'm sorry, but when he gets really close to the camera and starts yelling, he really does look like an angry little Oompa Loompa. I'm sorry.
I mean, I kind of agree that our judicial system is clearly broken. But, you got to assume that one of the first steps to fixing is stopping Rudy Giuliani from being part of it. Like, that just has to be, like, that's a low-hanging fruit. You can do that in an afternoon. You can bang that out in 5 minutes. Like he said, everyone agreed.
It's just like my back could not sustain, like, sitting like that anymore. I was just wondering if I had
This is literally the angle. This is the angle right here.
He should have done a second take.
He's really angry, too.
I think he should have done a second take. I think he should have gotten the sun out of his eyes because he was just really, really squinting in that one. Clearly uncomfortable. I don't think he needed to read out the names of the judges. That took a long time, and he clearly was not prepared for them to be as complex and have as many syllables as they did. Really, take 2.
Yeah, take 2. I mean, I don't know what his strategy is with this particular grievance, but I don't necessarily see this being so instrumental to ride him to the to the gubernatorial victory. I mean, the personal aggrievement with his father losing his law license when, like, I mean, the only reason he's been practicing law recently is to continue to suck up to Trump. Please.
I mean, frankly, Rudy Giuliani just got too online. He forgot that there are real consequences for doing stuff online, and ultimately just got banned. He got burned. You know, I think a lot of people want to talk about how we have to remove all the consequences from the real world of being too online, but, you know, guardrails exist so people can have fun.
It's amazing what it takes. Like, it's not like, is this the very first bit of malfeasance Rudy Giuliani's done that would get him disciplined by a proper bar association, or is this just the thing that has really embarrassed them publicly and they have to do something about it now?
Right. It's going to be really funny when Andrew Giuliani sets up for his next camera angle after he sees all the feedback to this one, and he tries to like overcompensate for it, and the next time he's doing a video, it's going to be like, Andrew Giuliani here, and I'm really angry at, you know, he's going to be all up in their face, all up in the camera's girl.
It's going to be a close-up of his mouth, just like a close-up of that, like, Giuliani mouth, just like talking.
All right, Rudy Giuliani. I'm trying this for the third time. Rudy Giuliani.
I'm sorry. I thought you were doing like a Candyman thing. Like if you say Rudy Giuliani 3 times and when you're alone, he just appears.
Well, I'm so looking forward to the continued candidacy of Andrew Giuliani. I gotta say.
Oh man, this is I did not see that clip. That was my first. Usually, a lot of the clips on this show, I see them a couple hours before or an hour before, and I'm prepared. This one, I was not expecting the max headroom over there.
Yep. All right, let's do Ted Cruz here. So. The right wing can't keep their talking points straight. Hypocrisy shaming them does nothing, but I'm going to do it anyway because I feel like it. Kamala Harris never went to the border. How she needs to go to the border. She can't understand how horrible it is for our border agents. And she went to the border, and now Ted Cruz is criticizing her for it.
But I got to say, even this announcement, so she announces that they're going to El Paso. El Paso is a lovely city. It is a beautiful place in Texas. It is not also, it also doesn't happen to be the locus of the crisis.
No, that's the Rio
You look at where the Rio Grande Valley is, and for folks who aren't from Texas, let me give you a sense. So El Paso is on the western tip of Texas. The Rio Grande Valley is almost on the southern tip of Texas. It's 800 miles away. To give you a sense of just how far they are, Chicago, Illinois is closer to Washington, D.C. than El Paso is to McAllen. And so she's going where the height of the problem isn't. Let me tell you what Kamala needs to do. Kamala, you need to go to the Rio Grande Valley. Kamala, you need to go to McAllen. Kamala, you need to go to the Donna Tent Facility, which is the tent city your administration has built.
I mean, like, okay, so she went there, but she didn't go to the right exact location. I mean, did you want to do some sort of scavenger hunt for her? She goes to El Paso, and then she finds some sort of, racist cartoon that Donald Trump has drawn. And in that envelope, there's a key. And then she gets to go under the border, and she finds the secret package that contains the white supremacist symbol that you've decided. Like, I don't even understand what the point of this is. She did exactly well, here we go. This is exactly what it is, though. She went down to Guatemala. She did the tough talk on immigration. She gave them exactly what they wanted. They still criticize her for it. She went down to the border. She did exactly what they wanted. Oh, you didn't go to the exact right location. I mean, and as Brendan was saying to us in our chat here, no one cares if you have to explain the exact location about where she needs to be going. So silly.
It's I do enjoy that as he's saying all this, Fox News shows the a video from San Diego, California. It's pretty great. I mean, I mean that's not exactly where Ted Cruz is telling you to go either, right?
Well, I'm sure San Diego is also closer geographically to the exact point of conflict. than wherever Kamala Harris happens to be at any point in time. I don't know where Ted Cruz is. I mean, Ted Cruz knows all about Mexico because he, disappeared there during the height of the controversy.
I was going to say, why not use Cancun as a point of reference, Ted?
Well, because Cancun is actually on like the southernish tip of the Yucatan Peninsula. Or am I thinking of Cabo?
I think you're right about Cancun.
Ted Cruz should be spitting this actually as like, I went into the belly of the beast. Kamala, why aren't you?
Why aren't you at the Four Seasons like I was? In the before we run, guys, I want to get into this Bernie clip just because I almost forgot about it. So Meghan McCain, the dreaded Meghan McCain, decided to ask what she thought was a journalistically important question of Bernie Sanders. His response was largely good, but it wasn't good enough. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
To stand up to the NRA and do what the American people want in terms of this terrible tragedy.
Senator Sanders, you are the godfather of the squad. You are hyper-progressive socialist, and you're talking about social justice before it was cool. But it feels like the squad today has moved even to the left of you. How is it for you to stand by everything AOC, Rashida Tlaib, and Ilhan Omar have said and done, particularly when it comes to Israel and talking about from the river to the sea and the extermination of Israel as a right to exist? Or do you think the movement, which you started, has moved away from what you envisioned?
Well, Megan, first of all, I don't believe that's what they're saying. And second of all, it's not my job to have to defend every member of Congress any more than...
I'm sorry. I just wanted to point out before we moved on how disgusting and disingenuous it is that she says that they are in favor of the eradication of Israel, and she's talking to a Jewish man. Like, last I checked, you're like, I mean, the complete gall to talk about their anti-Semitism or whatever the case may be. Last I checked, Megan, we were talking about you on the show last week as you were speaking for all of Christians. Pick one. Pick one. You don't get to be the voice of every aggrieved person when it fits your agenda. Of course, black people, brown people are completely excluded from whatever talking point she wants to espouse. But like totally just like cringeworthy, vile nonsense.
Well, and we just have to address this thing about like, does a state have a right to exist? Like, does South Africa have a right to exist as an apartheid state? Like, no state, like this is just not a formula. This is just a useful propaganda formulation. This isn't like a actual useful way to think about these things, because we know what it obscures now, and everybody has seen it, and it, like, the conversation's changed on this. Yeah, I'm so disgusted by Meghan McCain, and like I think the rest of the View, like, she's been going off again lately, and every once in a while the other View members get their pop in, and like that's not enough anymore. Like, she's here for a conservative reactionary project on going into like the waiting rooms of dentist office and all this shit. Like, she's doing actual damage, and it should be addressed as such.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just going to jump in, but go ahead, Emma.
No, I mean, this is a complete, gossipy show, and it's ridiculous, but this is one of the top rated political shows in the country. I just want like everyone to reckon with that. People regularly watch The View, and this person is saying these things without enough pushback from Bernie Sanders right there, which should have been, this is outrageous. That is a preposterous claim. They are not calling for the eradication of Israel. And by the way, no conversation. We're talking about right to exist. Palestine literally doesn't have a right to exist. They're refusing to allow people there to have any sovereignty or self-determination. But go on, Brandon.
No, I was just going to say Meghan McCain, like you mentioned before, she finds herself putting on she finds or has assigned herself the role of avatar victimhood. So whatever particular group we're talking about, or she can position herself as the mouthpiece of this week in terms of, I guess, speaking for the oppressed or the voiceless, she's willing to do that under the condition that their oppression is largely, or rather their perceived oppression in her mind, is largely the result of them not being allowed to oppress other people. It's like she feels very comfortable, I think, becoming the voice box for like, this very, very specific form of minority in her mind, Christian, specific Jewish, Israel supporting Jewish person, insofar that victimhood is specific to her desire to be allowed to play the victim while still, being the oppressor. It's just a hat that she wants to wear. She doesn't want to speak for, Black people whose like freedom is talking about things that might inconvenience her. She wants to speak for any group of people whose, perceived grievance is that another group is getting too many rights.
So right. Yeah, I mean,
and Bernie's got to get better prepared for those ambushes there. What he should have done is he should have right on camera. He should have went. What I have to say to that is free Palestine, free Palestine.
Talking to Meghan McCain, I feel like is just a waste of time. Not because you obviously have to if it's the rated political show in America just to reach a certain population that watch it. But she's so disingenuous, and the only response that she's going to give to any like valid pushback or even just like the mean response she deserves sometimes with these disingenuous questions is to start crying. She's going to start crying, she's going to start, playing a victimhood card, a different one than she was playing before. And then or just shuffle whichever deck she can find whichever victimhood card works this time, and she'll become that. And so you won't actually win anybody over. But, I think just laughing at the absurdity of the question and then saying it's not my job to speak for literally everyone is the best you can do, because that's just the truth.
I don't think it's the best he could have done here, though. I mean, let's just quickly listen to it, and we can expand on this afterwards. I interrupted the clip, so it's my fault. But, yeah.
He just goes on to say, like, my mission is,
Can we just play the first 15 seconds of it, though?
Yeah. Brendan, if you're just going to repeat what Bernie said, can't we just listen to Bernie say?
Megyn, first of all, I don't believe that's what they're saying. And second of all, it's not my job to have to defend every member of Congress any more than it is their job to defend every statement that I make. What I am focusing on right now is the reality that for the last many, many decades, the very rich in America have become much richer while working people are struggling. Real wages have not gone up in 48 years. And what I'm working on right now is a budget which says to the wealthiest people in this country, you know what? Even if you're a multi-billionaire with incredible power, you're going to have to start paying your taxes. All
right. Yeah, I just wanted that initial part where he said, it's not my job to defend. First, he says, I don't think they said that. But to me, that's not enough, because this smear is not even the same kind of smear that Bernie received. And Bernie received a ton of vile, disgusting smears. We all understand that. But this is aided by, of course, the Democratic Party. He received many of those exact same smears, too. That is using Ilhan Omar specifically, Rashida Tlaib to a lesser extent, and same with Ocasio-Cortez. But Ilhan Omar's Muslim faith and the fact that she was born in another country as currency to throw chum to the Israeli lobby to say, still support us, and to essentially cover their own ass for their support for apartheid genocide cultural genocide in Israel and in Palestine. And they are using it in this incredibly cynical project. And what it results in is death threats, threats of violence, complete, utter, awful treatment of a member of the progressive community who has a huge role to play in this project going forward. And Bernie has an obligation to not just move past that, in my view, and to just be a much stronger voice in that area and say that's a complete lie. Because, and I understand he's singularly focused, but I just did not appreciate how he didn't repudiate that more.
Right. To be fair, he has come out and defended the squad very wholeheartedly previously. It honestly looks to me like he was unprepared for the way this was presented. Obviously, we should criticize and urge him to be better prepared, but also I don't think it was, it was not an intentional slight there, I think.
No, I mean, I agree. I don't think it's intentional. And I agree with what Emma said. This has become, a continuous thing with the Democratic Party. Ilhan Omar has been being thrown under the bus multiple times since she's been elected to, has been elected to Senate and House. And ultimately, they have this they want to have it both ways. The Democratic Party wants to tout out the squad when they're fundraising, when they want the progressive side of America to be quiet. And then they also want to throw them as chum to the Republicans, to the racist base in America, as though they have no other way to, keep them placated either. And I think ultimately that just speaks to whether or not people want to work within the Democratic Party and want to work with these people. Because at the end of the day, the only thing Bernie could have really said is that, yeah, the Republicans are in fact racist, and I can expect this from them. What I don't expect this from is my Democratic Party and my Democratic counterparts, who are theoretically supposed to be doing the right thing when it comes to Asian American Pacific Islanders, but are also touting out lab leak theories that implicate China, erroneously. They're also doing stuff like throwing Ilhan Omar under the bus. But at the end of the day, that's their friends. Honestly, like, those are their friends. And I wonder how they are going to actually, I guess, bridge that divide, because I'm always waiting to see it too. I'm always waiting to see how people who want to work with the Democratic Party, how the Ilhan Omars, how the AOCs of the world want to actually address that fact that half of their own party hates them. But I don't know how you do it, honestly, without upsetting everybody.
And just can we return to like the from the river to the sea thing, which is basically a call to return to the British mandate for Palestine, and it's interpreted now, or coded by people like Meghan McCain deployed like this as a call for genocide. Basically, it's projection, right? Like,
it's projection, but they also literally call for genocide all the time. So not only is it projection, it's just that they're allowed to set these standards that are based entirely in, whatever group they decide deserves to be eradicated or not. Sorry, I think I interrupted you.
I think death to Arabs, and she says nothing.
Well, exactly. And it's like, there's a South African guy here, the good side of white South Africa, and he called an equal vote to be a recipe for slaughter in South Africa. Like, this is just the exact same logic playing out again.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, guys. I love Bernie. I just really wish there was, more strategy and more solidarity displayed, because I just think like the kinds of attacks against Ilhan Omar in this instance are so unique and so vile that there needs to be, a better response in that area than just kind of dismissing it. There needs to be a complete fact check on that kind of nonsense, because it has really racist and dark implications.
I agree. I always think Bernie is too easy on the Democrats. And I think that really comes at the heart of where, he's forced to be easy on other people as, an extension of the Democrats. And I mean, if you believe that Bernie is radical and would want to give a better answer on this, if he was prepared, I think there is a certain level of this where our political system demands that you be nice to the worst offenders because they're just by nature a friend of yours. In this case, Meghan McCain is probably not that, but just as a general rule for Bernie and a general dissatisfaction I have with him, he's too concerned with the success of the Democratic Party. And I would say the same thing about the Ilhan Omars and AOCs and Rashida Tlaibs out there. If the Democratic Party's success relies on them being able to throw you under the bus half the time, then I guess that's what it is. I guess that's just the way it is.
Yeah, it's an unfair burden that he has to bear. It's just,
I mean, I think it's a burden we all have to bear, ultimately. That we are all the victim of Bernie's inactivity. We're all a victim of a lot of people's inactivity. And I think it becomes more incumbent of us to, be able to target those people, to demand that they do more.
We're just going to read a few more IMs and then we're going to head out of here. I'm just going to read this one randomly. Okay, Mom says, Emma, I think you're doing great. Bez Guapolo says, Binder says that OAN is only getting money from cable companies. You forgot all the MyPillow money.
Oh, right. He paid them. I don't know how much he paid them, but he took out like a whole block every time he releases one of those new election fraud documentaries. They basically become like a paid advertising, one of those like late night paid promo channels for like a whole day every time he does that.
I've seen some of those documentaries. They're really they don't have much evidence in them, but I allow me to say you shouldn't sleep on MyPillow's effect.
Oh, is OANN? Sorry, I was just saying OANN's off YouTube. I didn't know that.
Right, they lost their YouTube channel, right?
Ouch.
Left is Def says, Matt, I'm 36 and you just listed all my favorite shows circa 1990. Wow, that was a blast. Zoobly Zoo was everything. Did you watch Fraggle Rock too? Quick.
I did, but I wasn't as into Fraggle Rock as I was into the other shows.
Majority Report wardrobe coordinator. Have you seen Tim Dillon's Megan McCain impression? Don't play it during the show. I have not. Non-traditional lefty said, what was the context of this Megan McCain-Bernie interview? It seems like he may have been focused on something else and expecting different sorts of questions for some reason. I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah, he's talking about the budget.
What Megan McCain did do though that was very clever on her part was she was like softening him up, like, oh, you're the godfather of the squad. You were into social justice before it became cool. You're the real trailblazer, Bernie.
I mean, she's saying like as if it was almost.
There's a real problem now. Sorry to interrupt, but there's a real problem now with that being the new social justice issue is anti-Semitism. Like, I get that there are anti-Semitic attacks, but it was, I think, there's a coordinated effort to turn the rising awareness for Palestinian solidarity into people are starting to get a little bit too anti-Semitic on, I don't know. Like, I think that was clear to me.
100%. Oh, I almost forgot. It's always snowy in Ottawa says, don't forget to mention that tonight on TYT, Casper and Cashews, the reunion. I'm going to be on the Young Turks tonight for the first time since I left. I'm really excited about it. I just haven't had the time. It's going to be myself and Anna Kasparian, a good friend of mine, and we're going to have some fun. So, hopefully I'll get to talk about the Britney Spears situation, which was like, I'm interested in talking about, honestly. So check that out. It'll be a really good time.
Sam hasn't already covered the Britney Spears thing?
He is not.
I just want to say free Britney. I'm a big Britney Spears fan, and it's unconscionable what's been happening to her for the past 15 years.
Yeah, genuinely.
It's genuinely unconscionable. And it's what's worse is that, like, pop culture wise, she was the butt of people's jokes for such a long time, just because, she made pop music and it's easy to joke about, like, oh, it's stupid blondes. But in reality, it's misogyny, it's the sexualization of teenagers, it's everything that's wrong with our society being pushed onto one girl because, like, she just happened to be famous. And, it's disgusting.
Right.
We have to, I hope someone who has, the background in it, I would love to know what happened, what was going on in the culture in like the early 2000s where we were doing stuff like that and it was just normal, like the way we covered celebrities and the way like things were going on, and like how it was just constantly dunking on people at their very lowest.
I mean, the blog space, the blogger sphere was new. It was an easy way to get nothing new per se that isn't around now. The blogger sphere was new. Like, internet was new. Like, Perez Hilton was coming out. Like, everyone was making their bones, like, covering celebrities. And there were just more celebrities too, I think.
Yeah. Right. The final I am of the day now, guys. And the final I am of the day. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Doug in Denver says there's a great debate between Noam Chomsky and William F. Buckley about Vietnam for anyone who wants to see what a real lefty debating a conservative used to look like. I mean,
watch Baldwin versus Buckley too.
Yes, I would say if you want to watch a good like crash course Chomsky versus Buckley, but the movie Best of Enemies is good because Gore Vidal versus Buckley is fun, even though they kind of like paper over who is a lot more evil. But anything else you guys want to say before we wrap? I did not mean to cut you guys off.
Just youtube.com/Matt Binder. Subscribe. I'll be live tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern time. Follow me on Twitter at Matt Binder if you're not already. And it was a pleasure being with you guys, as it always is every week.
All right. How about Discourse?
Well, obviously you can listen to the new episode of Discourse on SoundCloud /Expand the Discourse on iTunes, Spotify, if you subscribe to the playlist. And I'll just say free Britney one more time. It's long overdue.
Free Britney. All right, guys. Thanks so much, and see you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made, for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow